showtime. We are live. We are locked in. You are locked on. We are live. This is Misaligned. Welcome to another episode of the talk show, the conversations where we discuss the things that we shouldn't discuss because we should discuss them because they make sense to discuss. Today, we're going to be trying something slightly different. It kind of turns into the same kind of concept around the things we've been discussing, wide-reaching socio-economic, social, geopolitical concepts, but maybe transcending a bit beyond that and challenging the general ideas that we tend to have when we think about things like democracy. We seem to think that these things work, but do they though? Maybe there's a different way we could go about things and make that bit of a change. Today, Yemi's going to be running the show. So with that, I'm going to hand over to him to handle the moderation. Yemi, floor is yours. Oh, there we go. Oh, floor is almost Yemi. Just give me a second while he finds the floor. While it's doing that, it's worth just maybe doing a bit of a hit. There we go.
Sorry, guys. Just moving away and trying to create maybe a bit more internet coverage here.
Look like a villain there for a second over there. I was looking at you and I was like, oh, he looks like one of those villains in James Bond movies. The light at the back of your head. There we go. Over to you. It's all yours. Floor is yours, Yemi.
Right. Hello, guys. Good to be here again. Jab and Cross, and I imagine some listeners. So we are talking about change today. Change. I imagine that might mean slightly different things to different people, but what I think I think most of us would have come to terms with is certainly within Nigeria, and I imagine most of Africa, that people yearn for change. I think we've often felt that we have been at the cusp of change, but over and over again, it seems like we've not quite felt that the change has materialized, or we felt let down. So we are really going to be sort of examining this topic of change today. And I suppose primarily from the standpoint of where is change going to come from? Is it something that comes from within, or does it have to come from without? Can we self-engineer change from within, or do we need a revolution, whatever that means to people? So I suppose that's where we're going to be sort of taking things from today. And perhaps I can go straight into it by just presenting the question to Jab, straightforward. Change. What does that mean? And why do we need change?
So I think for me, because we are misaligned and we like to talk about geopolitics, I would like to center it around that. And obviously, change might mean different things to different people, but people say it's the one thing that is constant. The one thing that is constant in life is change. With respect to geopolitics, geoeconomics, I think that for me, the sort of change that I want to see is one that prospers the many as opposed to the few. And the concept of democracy sort of evolves or revolves around that concept, which is how best can we bring about change that benefits the many as opposed to the few. And there is a very popular definition of democracy that says it's government of the people, for the people, and by the people. In my mind, I think that there is no country that is democratic. I think that democracy is an ideal, something that we can aspire to. The idea that the West, USA, Britain, France, Germany, these countries are democratic, to me just totally flies in the face of evidence. They are not democratic. USA has never been democratic. It's not a democracy. It was founded on genocide and apartheid, and for most of its existence, this state didn't even have voting. People couldn't vote. It was the only people who could vote were very rich men, rich white men, and who made up maybe about 6% perhaps of the population. So, and So it's never been. You can't say that that is democratic. So people, women, anybody who wasn't who didn't belong in that 6% demography didn't have the chance to vote or to exercise their democratic right, if you want to put it that way. And we can also look at how they've pillaged the rest of the world. They've colonized the rest of the world. There's been, slavery. These are not democratic ideals. It's not the sort of thing you'd expect. It's the sort of change you'd expect of a democratic nation. So my I'm hoping that during the course of this conversation, I can lay out my own thoughts about democracy. Why I don't think that it's an ideal to it's an ideal to aspire to. I don't think that it exists in any one nation. And to round up this introduction, I would say that this question about what is the best way to change a system, is it from within or from without, has been something that I have thought about for a very long time. And sometimes I go from, yes, you can change a system from within. Other times I'm like, no, actually from without. Other times I'm like, actually, maybe you need a bit of both.
That sounds like me.
Okay. So, but at the moment, I feel that maybe change perhaps has to come from outside. I'm not sure that the systems that we've got at the moment can deliver the change that we want. But
okay, that's a very fantastic and comprehensive take. Throws up quite a number of things there that I'm sure we will aim to kind of dissect one after the other. I see the look on Cross's face. It looks like you're raring to go as well. What I would, and feel free to take this wherever you like, but what I would suggest to you is to perhaps think about some of the points that Jabs raised there. Do you share his idea of what change means? Do you share his idea of what democracy means? He said, for example, that democracy is an ideal. It's not something that anyone has. It's something that almost becomes like a guiding principle rather than a thing. I don't know if I've represented that correctly, but
I think before I even do that, the first thing is to probably define democracy, because I think it's important that we're on the same page, or at least, and this is probably going to be part of the conversation, that we at least know what pages we're talking from. My definition of democracy is the standard definition that you'd see within the Oxford languages, which is basically system of government by the whole population or all eligible members of the state, typically through elected representatives. Now, the idea of democracy, now, because we're moving away from standard definitions, is that we have a system where the people are able to exercise control through people they've put into positions of power, and basically power in this case, meaning control of resources fundamentally, and the ability to establish the law of the land. So basically how we behave, why we behave, what we do, and how we do things. Going to Jab's point, there's an ideal. Democracy is an ideal. And this is going to tie in quite nicely into my views later on. I'm going to state it straight up right now, that I am completely not a fan of democracy. I think democracy doesn't work. I think we need to shift it. And it's not just through change by the word change. Take a slight step back again to define this. There are two types of change. There's incremental change, which is what we see through current democracy, where you'd have one party on the left, one party on the right. Technically speaking, they're kind of the same, but they call themselves left and the right, and they have radically different views, but they're kind of the same. And year on year, or every 4 years, really, you tend to have incremental changes. They're all the same. We've seen this in Britain over the past 20 years, really, moving between the Democratic and the Tory party. Same thing we've seen in America. They've not really changed until we've seen what's happened with Trump, but that's a completely different conversation. My view is quite simple. Democracy in itself as a system doesn't lead to change. It can't, by definition. Democracy is a system where we've elected people to take control, to give us guidance based on their own interests. It's not about our interests. It really is about theirs. There's quite a lot of challenges and issues that come as a result of this within that space. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but is it all right if I share a quick video?
No, I'm going to give you a jab before you do that. I'm going to give you a jab. Okay, okay. So,
no pun intended. Let's go.
So if what you're saying to me, or what I have understood you to say, is that you do agree with me that democracy is an ideal, something to attain, something we can aspire to. But then you say that democracy does not deliver change. And then you go on to describe what, in my view, is not democratic, because you're talking about elections that we hold every 4 years, in the US, and maybe every 5 years here. So it almost as though you are trying to describe Christianity, right, by its abuse. Do you see where I'm coming from? You're
that's what I mean.
Christianity by the actions of Christians, as opposed to what are the fundamentals of Christianity. That's how I'm getting your...
Well, it kind of. The challenge with democracy is, well, I kind of agree, but the difference is Christianity already had a workable baseline in the beginning. It was workable. These were the principles of Christianity. That's how you needed to work to be a Christian, according to Jesus Christ. You go across, you spread the word. You don't necessarily need to sow your roots or to set your roots in any specific place. Make sure you're going around without having any clothes, worrying about the clothes on your back or the food on your table, etc. The key thing was...
let me interrupt. Let me explain a bit more. So, okay, let's assume that Christianity is a body of belief, and its core principles are love, respect to other people.
Yep.
Right? Okay. So, or you can take Islam. I don't mind which religion you take. Right? So those are the core principles: love and respect to your neighbors. But we know that Christians, people who profess to be Christians or Muslims or whatever religion, don't always adhere to these core principles. So to then say that Christianity is, or any religion, sorry, I keep saying Christianity, but any religion, to then say that religion X is problematic because you're judging it by
its implementation.
Yes, thank you. That's what I'm going, right? So if we agree that the ideals of democracy is to deliver change or results that benefits the many, I know that you're taking your definition from Oxford Dictionary or whatever it is, but I don't think that the essence of what they're saying there is wrong. So if the essence is to deliver good government for the many and not the few, election might be one way of achieving that result or that objective. Does that make sense?
Can I just raise an objection there very quickly, but whilst both of you debate that? So the definition that Cross has brought about from the dictionary, it doesn't say anything about delivering change. It just talks about representation, right? That's all it talks about. So I think, again, just for us to be mindful of that, there's nothing in the definition of democracy, even the dictionary definition, that promises change.
Exactly. Okay. That was my key point here. That it's not the democracy and revolution, democracy and change are not, they're not synonymous. Democracy is a system of governance. Now, that system of governance does not necessarily need to be a change agency or a change agent.
Okay. All right. So,
let me interesting now, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll wing on that. And this is the challenge, right? Where it's about, well, okay, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about a system of governance? Are we talking about what's required to lead to change that actually positively impacts on the general populace? It's two different things.
Right.
Absolutely. I do agree with that. Those are two different questions.
Yes. Yes. So in my mind, I don't think that definition, I understand what you're saying, that it doesn't mention change.
So what's your definition then? Maybe we'll start with that then. It makes a bit more sense to both of us.
Well, I'm quite happy with government of the people, for the people, by the people, right?
Yeah.
Whether you do that
even that says nothing about change.
Exactly.
No, okay, yes, that is true. But then what is the purpose of government then?
Organizing society.
So yes, to govern.
For what purpose? For what purpose?
The purpose varies.
So yes. So the purpose has to be, it becomes a value that's imputed. So let me again kind of frame this in a way. So you might say
we can't say, for instance, I'm going to take an extremely almost perverse example, okay? But just bear with me. Can we say that the government is there to say, is the purpose of government to benefit few people as opposed to the many? Is it to serve the interests of a few people?
So this is a value judgment, and that's where we need to be careful when we have this conversation, so that we don't talk past each other, Okay, so just because something is good and that most of us will intuitively agree that it's good does not mean that it comes in the definition of the function of a thing. So, for example, if I decide to buy a car takes you from one place to another, and then if someone says, "Oh, well, but what is the function of it if it doesn't take your kids, if you can't use it to take your kids to school, or if you can't use it to take your wife shopping?" Okay, again, that's a value judgment, but
Okay.
but there's nothing in the definition of a car that references going to school. But you and I can agree that taking your kids to school should be one of the things you do with your
Okay.
car. There's no argument about that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense, but I'm going to tackle you. I don't. Okay, I'm
Well,
going to
that's why
tackle
we're
you.
here.
Yes, okay, so yeah, because it talks about the definition that he's taken from the dictionary. It talks about representation, right?
Yes.
I would argue that when people talk about representation, they are talking about doing something that is in the interest of the majority. I think that is what representation means, because you're not going to, if you have 100 people, you're not going to have 100 people agreeing about a thing. But if 87 people decide that actually they want to go one way, let's say 5 decide they want to go that way, another 2 want to go that way. To me, when we talk about representation, we are saying that actually we are going to go with what 87% or the 87
And
people.
what's the guarantee that whatever 87% decide, majority in this case, is going to lead to positive change? Well, where did you get that idea from? That has to lead to positive change because majority agree with it?
Yes, but so that obviously is the fault with representation. And then when we then come to discussing the faults of democracy or how it is supposedly practiced, we can then start to look into that. But I would argue if we talk about representation, immediately we're talking about what values. You have to talk about values. It's implied. You've got to talk about values.
No, you do. Again, I think.
And we're talking about the values that represent the interest, if I can put it that way.
Yes, but just because you have the values that represent an interest does not draw a straight line between that and positive change. So again, I've got lots of values. I've got lots of ideas about how, even as an individual, I think I can make my life better. Some of those ideas will lead to positive change. Some won't. Right? So there's nothing in the purity of thought and intention that guarantees positive outcomes. I'm sure we all know this in life. We've been through education and work, and sometimes we try our best with good intentions and the right mindset and good values, and it doesn't work, right?
Okay. But can we agree then? Can we agree that for the purpose of this conversation, we are going to accept that when we talk about democracy, we're talking about representing the interests of the majority. It's government. If it says government of the people, for the people, by the people, so government of the people suggests to me that this is something that we're trying to do because the purpose of government is cohesion, is to cohesion and its direction and its inclusiveness. It's a lot of things. It's a lot of.
I disagree, Jab. I disagree. I think you're inferring quite a lot of additional variables, and this is why I fundamentally disagree with democracy anyway, because you're just adding lots of. You're making a piece of bread become a sandwich. You just added some lettuce, there's some mayo on it, there's butter, and I'm not talking about bread anymore. This is not bread.
And the reason this is important, right? It should not normally be important. The reason it's important is that you've made a very big claim. Okay, and for us to be able to dissect that claim and get beyond it, we have to look at definitions. You've made a big claim. You said America is not a democracy, right? For us to be able to deal with that question, we have to be able to examine what democracy is, irrespective of what your values are, right? You can't. So for you to examine that question, you can't begin to impute your own value. What is a car? And then I start saying, oh, well, you don't take your kids to school with it. What is the use? Like, fine, you and I can agree that taking a kid to school is a good thing with the car, but it's not inherent in the definition of a car. So, and I think that's very important for us to kind of, again, ordinarily it shouldn't be important, because you and I agree that the benefit of the purpose of government should be to benefit the people. We don't disagree on that. The disagreement is that is not inherent in the definition of democracy. It isn't. It just isn't.
And this plays out. And Jab, I think this comes to, because obviously we've got a couple sections within this conversation about whether democracy works itself, and also what the alternatives could possibly be. But this is an inherent issue with democracy, that I do not fundamentally believe that governments have a duty of care to its people, nor do they even those in governments across the world, in any democratic state that I have studied or looked at. Hang on 1 second. I do not believe that exists, that duty of care to the people exists in the actual life cycle of democracy. What exists is the expectation that they can promise a duty of care in order to get elected. They do not get held accountable during the process of the actual execution. They only get that sort of management during the electoral process, that 6-month window where they can say whatever they want. It doesn't matter whether they're going to do what it is that they've said. It doesn't matter whether they actually have your interests at heart. It doesn't matter whether or not your interests align with theirs. It doesn't matter whether or not there's investment from unknown big bank movers behind the scenes. And that is what determines what policies are being utilized or implemented during the actual tenure. No, none of that matters. What matters is they can convince you that they have your interests at heart for 4 to 6 months, and that's it.
Okay.
So it looks like, 1 second, please. So it looks like you've brought us very nicely into the second question, actually, which is that, does democracy work, or is it helpful, is it useful? And so that's very helpful. I believe you wanted to kind of jump in there, Jab. Sorry to kind of, I just wanted to signpost that we've kind of moved to the second question, which is quite seamless in a sense.
Yes. Yeah. So it's kind of what I was going to discuss. So I think I would say that you and Cross being pedantic here. I really think that in that definition, I think that you can infer. So, for instance, Cross was saying that at election time, politicians come and make all these promises to you. What are those promises? Those promises are about values. They're saying, we're going to build your schools, we're going to build your roads, we're going to make sure you've got welfare, your kids can, have good health care. So that's what government is about. And you can't separate one from the other. I understand that. I think you guys have been too pedantic. I think we can assume that inherent in that definition, the values, I think is just given, which is that government is there to protect the interests of the majority of the people. And how do we do that? It's by ensuring that, you organize society, you can protect the properties, make sure that people have free speech, all of these ideals that the West are so good on paper, but when it comes to implementation,
where are you coming up with these? You're just adding them in from nowhere. You're just coming up with your own different things that government's supposed to do. I could continue that government should also make sure that people have slippers in front of their house. You have to have a tree in your backyard as a requirement. We need to make sure that everybody
protect the environment. They have to. You can do all that, and this is where it becomes a slippery slope. And I totally agree with us. So this is I think it's a fundamental in how we argue, right? And how people argue. And sometimes if you want to get right to the heart of the matter, really, it's best not to, in my view, again, this is me talking, I'm not saying that there's one written principle somewhere, that not to get yourself into hard lines that you really can't defend. Right? You just can't defend it. So when you say something like America is not a democracy, you can't defend it. There's no way, because it is.
No, so let me defend it.
Because it may not be your type of democracy. It may not be the ideal democracy. It may not be the best democracy. It may not be how you and I think democracy should be. But it is a democracy.
Okay, let me defend it. When you hear American presidents say that the US is a democracy, is the beacon of democracy, or even the UK, what do you understand them to mean? What are they talking about? What values are they talking about?
I think they're just lying. I don't think they're so I
because
don't
you
think
can't.
they're the beacon of democracy. I think they're
What
just
do you mean
lying.
anyway?
Okay,
We're a democracy. So what does that mean? We're a democracy. If Babangida sat down in the early 90s, right, or late 80s and said, or early 90s and said, we're a democracy in Nigeria, well, what does that mean? I mean,
They're just
technically
lying.
speaking, you know what I mean? Like, you could say, well, you know, you're setting up the elections. Well, does that mean it's a democracy? Absolutely
okay,
not.
but I have given you reasons why I don't think that America has ever been and I'm choosing America not
reasons?
because. So
What are the reasons well
I
embedded
outlined them.
into the definition?
I outlined them at the start of this, which is if we talk about, let's say, representation, the Western democracies, as they're called, I don't know if you're aware, but they like to call themselves electoral democracies because they have created this connection between elections and results and democracy. So as far as they're concerned, if we can demonstrate that we hold elections, never mind that the people may not even know what they are voting about, what issues they're voting about, right? Never mind that you can use the algorithms to persuade people to vote one way or another without actually even understanding the systems. Never mind all of these things. If we can just demonstrate that we are holding elections every X amount of years, it means that we are a democracy. But I've gone back to say that if you look at the duration of time that America has been a country, there has been no time that you can say it was a democracy. If democracy means government of the people, for the people, by the people, it's never been. It's always been, it's always been a government for a few people, by a few people, and they project, and then they say that we're doing that. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think this segues into second section actually quite perfectly, because I'm going to concede this one and concede that to you that the definitions could change, right? But this goes to the video I would like to jump that goes quite nicely into the second piece. And let's say yes, it's for the people, by the people, and it changes definitionally. Yemi, am I all right to
Absolutely.
share a video? Oh, thank you. Let me just share this video really quickly. Let's have a look at this. Right. So this is a short YouTube short from Nas Debates, a very interesting political debater on YouTube. And let's see a couple thoughts, and then I'll just I'll let him give the backstory, and then we'll talk about what I was thinking here about whether or not democracy works. Fair use.
So there's no volume on that.
Oh, no volume?
No, I can't hear it.
I can't hear either.
Oh, 1 second. 1 second. All right, can you? Right, let's do it again. Ready?
It's subtitled, so maybe okay.
Yep.
Not every democracy is perfect, but the beauty of democracy is that every 4 or 5 years, we can change the leader. In every country you mentioned, we have the ability to choose a different leader if it's not working out. In a country that doesn't have democracy, we are stuck. And by the way, there are many countries that don't have democracy that are just as badly run as countries with democracies that don't quite work.
You mentioned the beautiful thing about democracy is that it changes leaders every 4 years. That's actually the terrible thing about democracy. The biggest problems in your country, the sewer system in your country, the infrastructure in your country, the nuclear arsenal, the army in your country needs more than 4 years to fix. It needs 10 years to fix, 15 years to fix. What's happening in America or in democratic countries? Every 4 years, there's a zigzag. There's a new policy. Heck, you work at a startup. To build a small startup, you need 5 years.
Right. So there's
sorry. Yeah, sorry, go on, Yemi.
No, I was just going to read a comment very quickly, and I'll give it back to you on that, because it actually, again, ties into it very quickly. So QB Finance has said, what happened to Nigeria's democracy when they got independence from the UK in 1960? The leaders have not done what they promised the people and have suffered. Is democracy working for the country? Which is exactly what your video was trying to address. So perhaps we can jump straight into that and cross.
And this is exactly where I was going anyway, with my thought process around all of what I was saying. That definitionally, democracy sounds like a fantastic idea. With the soundbite that people give, like Jab, the soundbite that Jab just gave as well. Democracy is, the what's it called? The system of governance for the people, by the people. But for me, it's just words. It doesn't mean anything. What does it actually do? What happens during a democracy? The reality is, democracy leads to a system where people come in to gain power for a defined period of time to do what they want. During that period where they have zero accountability, and unless they do something extremely criminal, will not be held to account. And when they leave, they end up having extreme power and excessive wealth. It is about self-interest. Democracy as a system does not lead to any positive outcome, in my view. On top of that, as if that's not bad enough, we have a system where these changes happen very, very frequently. So there's very little stability, and the consequences of that stability is not the consequences of that stability is not felt by the democratic leaders. It's felt by the people. A good example is Brexit. Before the Brexit vote, what happened? David Cameron came in there and set up this non-supermajority referendum that didn't need to happen, but he put it anyway, and we are still feeling the consequences of that in the UK. I'll go to Nigeria in a second, but it's important to read these stats considering that we on this call live in the UK. Brexit cost, what's happened? We're expecting there's been a 12.3% drop in investment as of 2023, just 3 years after we left the EU. The foreign direct investment in the UK has dropped by 37% from the Brexit vote in 2016 to 2022. By 2035, the current projection is there are going to be 3 million less jobs, 32% less investment, 5% lower exports from the country, and 16% less imports into the UK. And generally will be 300 billion, not 30 million, not 300 million, no, not 30 billion, not 300 billion worse off. Where's David Cameron? In the immortal words of I've forgotten his name now already. It's been a while. He sat in Nice with his trotters up. He's not feeling any of the consequences. He did what he did to just survive those 4 years. He didn't even stay, and he left. They do the things that benefit them. They do the things that benefit their parties. Fundamentally, democracy doesn't work. One last thing, just before I yield the floor here, there are arguments for democracy. I think democracy does some interesting things. One, it's a non-violent pathway, so it allows for peaceful governance, quote unquote, of the land. So people can say, well, things are happening, things are fully are functional and structured. We have the police in place, we have fire service, you have the NHS, for example. Again, Nigeria, in the UK, we can go to Nigeria in a bit. There's stability from an institutional perspective. We know what to expect year on year for the rest of our lives. We know that this is the thing. It's understandable. Citizens feel like they're participating, so we don't feel too far away. We carry our votes and we think that means something to us. There's a bit of adaptability around year on year. Somebody comes with a new policy, Corbyn comes in, Atiku comes in, Tinubu comes in. That's a different story entirely. And then the last part is that it feels like it's legitimate. People say, well, I voted for this. We look at this. Well, what I wanted didn't happen, but I know that most people wanted this for whatever reason. So no matter what the consequences are, we kind of feel like it's a legitimate outcome. The challenges with that are, and these are the big things for me. One, propaganda and misinformation. Voters do not really have a say in what they get. We don't know what we're getting. It was very clear during the past 5-6 years about the importance of social media in being able to manipulate people to make decisions that were not in their own interests. So they're voting and putting things into power that they had no control, knowledge, or understanding of. Second part is elite capture. It's only the powerful that end up getting into power. That's a very important thing. The average person who's sitting down trying to make that difference can't get anywhere close to power. They just can't. You need to feed into the powerful. There's no accountability. Same thing I was talking about as well. That every 4 years is like, oh, after 4 years you go away, but then during those 4 years you can do whatever you want, destroy everything, and after 4 years, who cares? Whatever. There's the illusion of choice. This last point. There's illusion of choice. This very last point, illusion of choice. We feel like we have options. But fundamentally, in all of the cases that I've looked at over the past 10 years, in every single country, whether we're talking about Nigeria, whether we're talking about Canada, whether we're talking about France, whether we're talking about England, whether we're talking about America, there is no real choice. Well, America is probably the only one I've seen recently that it's like, well, someone's going to scatter everything and the other one isn't. But across all the other bits and pieces that we've been looking at, there's no real choice. It's still the powerful people who have no consequence that are able to spread propaganda and misinformation to the degree that allows them to have power and control with no accountability that win. And without you.
So I think we're going to go to Jab next, but I just wanted to plant a flag on the cross because we might come back to it. Because I think in some sense you've proved inadvertently, you've made Jab's point for him that you and I disagreed with. And I want you to see how you address that, because you said that the people don't know what they're voting for. So if they don't, then how is that representation? But don't answer it yet. We're going to come back to it, because when I heard that, I just, well, you've just proved Jab's point, at least to an extent, but there might be some sort of way that you explain that. So,
Yep.
Jab, does democracy work? Are you a fan of democracy?
Okay. So
If it doesn't
in
work,
answering
what are
this
the
question,
alternatives?
in answering this question, I realize that I am not going to be able to persuade you in this particular episode about values as well as democracy. The fact that they are in the word representation, implicit is the concept of value judgment. So I'm not going to be able to persuade you on that. But I want to put it out there that I feel that the purpose of government is to look after the many and not just the few. And when I say look after, I am implying that the government is working to serve the interest of the majority of the people. And just to reiterate again, democracy is an ideal. I don't believe that there's any one country that has achieved it. So with that caveat, I'm going to use China as an example. So in my judgment, China is a more democratic country. So if let's assume that democracy exists, okay? I would say that you can look at democracy as a continuum, as a spectrum. On that spectrum, I think that a country like China is actually more democratic than the rest of the Western nations. And by that, I'm meaning countries like the USA and the UK and all of the other countries that we traditionally associate with democracy. Why? Because it's lifted 850, almost 1 billion people out of poverty. It's ended absolute, poverty. If you take away Chinese contribution to poverty alleviation from the global total, over the last 40 years, there's barely been any movement in poverty alleviation. All of the values that we talk about is because of the Chinese contribution. And if you do look at surveys consistently, the CPC is actually scoring very high. The Chinese people are very happy with their government, and they feel that their government is delivering on what it's promised.
But
therefore,
the CCP isn't democratic, though.
The
CCP isn't democratic, though.
So, no, I would argue that it is, but I'm going to answer the question about Nigeria. We can look at that in a moment. I would say that the Chinese system of electing their government is more democratic than the system that we've got in places like the USA and the UK and back home in Nigeria. Now, to answer QB Finest question, I think to answer that question, it needs a bit of nuance. Has democracy, is it working in the country? There are some things that have, without a doubt, have definitely improved in Nigeria. There are other things, obviously, that haven't. And if we look at, let's say, the literacy rate in Nigeria, for instance, all over the world, people talk about how brilliant we are. The average Nigerian has, 2-3 degrees. We are smashing it, in the US, in the UK. Our students go to university, they're doing quite well. We've got so many universities, back at home. And if you go back to, let's say, the 1960s, in fact, let's just go back to the colonial Africa. The system that we had then was, we were literally across, not just Nigeria, but across Africa, we were literally begging the colonial government to build us schools. They wouldn't do it. And any roads that existed or any railways connected the site of a natural resource to the ports. So it's that sort of one-track way. The good hospitals were built to look after the the expatriates. So towards the 1940s and 50s, when Africans started talking about decolonization and we want independence and all of those things, it was only at that point that schools started to be built. And I think in Ibadan, I think was in Nigeria, for instance, was established in 48, and I think finally it was built, I think, about 19, a bit later anyway. So, but this came from a lot of agitation by Africans, and what they wanted to do was to produce a set of administrators who were going to rule on their behalf, which is kind of why, in a sense, democracy has not yielded the results, if we want to call it elections, have not yielded the result that we're all looking for in Nigeria. Because by and large, don't forget that when we became independent, we were independent on paper, but not in reality, because what was happening was that all of these neo-colonial forces like the IMF and the World Bank were being used to trap us in debt. And then once you became indebted, to then get loans and to get money, to get stuff to build your roads and all of those kind of things, you had to accept very stringent terms and conditions, which were designed to submit your sovereignty to them, such that you were being remote controlled from elsewhere. So, no, I wouldn't say that democracy has delivered the dividends that we want in Nigeria, but there are definitely some things that I think better now than there were if you were to go back to the colonial era, because colonialism was never designed to benefit us. It was a system of extraction and a system to maintain this order that they have set up, which is parasitism, actually, which is that we are going to use your resources to enrich ourselves, and you stay at the bottom, because if you were to equalize, we will not have access to these resources.
Where has democracy actually ever delivered on its ideals? Ever? In all of the eras that we've had in recorded history, where has democracy ever delivered on its ideals?
Yes, but in my view, democracy is an ideal. That's what I was talking about. But if you're talking about, okay, you asked me about China, maybe I can talk about China a bit, right?
Mm.
So what you're going to find is that the world as it is a global dictatorship. And you've heard of the rules-based order. This is a system that America is in charge of. And it's got its lackeys, which are the rest of the Western world. So they're like a support team to prop up this system. And this system is one where they say, you do as you're told. We make the rules. Your job is to do as you're told. So they will assign various roles to different countries or different parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
But the ultimate purpose of this system of hierarchy that they've built, because they're right at the top, they're like right at the top of it, is to make sure that all the resources is channeled upwards, and they just eat and just eat and just eat and just eat and just benefit from the system. But everybody else who is below them has to do as they are told.
So technically, aren't you saying the world is autocratic then? And by definition,
yes, absolutely.
Yes. So your point basically.
One second, but let me explain this global dictatorship. Give me two minutes. So remember, because before that, the whole world was under the British, French, German Empire, those sort of things, right? European empires, basically.
Yep.
At the end of the Second World War, because they destroyed themselves, and America gave them this Marshall Plan, which they used to rebuild themselves in exchange for relinquishing their empires. What's happened is America has now absorbed all of those empires. So it makes the rules. It uses structures like the IMF, the World Bank, all this NATO and its naval bases everywhere to enforce that rules-based order. Why is China a threat? China is a threat because China has a different system, which is, to all intents and purposes, socialist or communist. People might disagree, but it will be a conversation for another day, and I'll be happy to explain why I believe it is. Now, with that system, it's lifted almost 1 billion people out of poverty. It's surpassed America on so many fronts. right? They're not keeping up. And if China succeeds, the trouble is that other countries are going to think, hang on a minute, we are going to copy China. And if countries start to do that, then you're going to undermine this rules-based order, which the West have, over the last 500 years, cultivated, and they have cultured it, and they want it to remain that way. So that explains the situation with Taiwan and all these things about, trying to contain China. This is what's responsible for the war that is impending in that area.
You're losing me a little bit. I want to go back to it. I think
So I need to jump in here, Cross, if you don't mind. And I don't want us to lose one other part of our conversation, because we were talking about change and how to bring it about. I think we spent quite a considerable amount of time talking about democracy. We haven't said anything about revolution. So whilst you addressing Job's point as you want to, just think about how you begin to introduce revolution. What role does it have?
Yeah, 100%. So I think this is an important, and this is to my point, actually. So what you're referring to here, Jab, is something called autocratic management. I don't know if you're aware of that theory by Frederick W. Taylor. So it's a management system where you've got this consistently devolving levels of authority across in a pyramid sort of manner, where you have the most competent person at the top who's delivering value, or who's giving that who has the most value, who's giving the most directive view about things. In your worldview, you're talking about this from a global perspective, where there's someone at the very top, which could be America through the Marshall Plan, etc. Or in the future, is probably likely to be China. Who knows? Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe Russia just wakes up tomorrow and just says, you know what, we're going to do some random stuff and become the kings of the world. I don't know. But it's still the same concept. There's one at the top that devolves, devolves leadership through their own autocratic control. Now, this goes straight to what I'm saying. I personally am of the view that democracy doesn't work. Autocracy is what we need. And we need an autocracy of the competent, where the competent are not having needed to lie or to fit within these 4-year cycles of the whims of misinformation, of powers by individual private actors, which change year on year. The average, the top 10 billionaires change every 4 years or something like that. They're changing powers that be, changing interests, etc. I think, and initially I'll go to even QB Finance, so that I need to address yours as well, that the leaders have done what they did because they're within democracies. We try to establish democracies and they don't work. I think autocracies are exactly what we need. People in absolute power who say this is exactly what is going to be and how things will turn out. Now, what matters is making sure we have people at the highest levels of integrity, and there's a system that allows that management of control. Whether it's through, I don't think a dynasty works where this is the son, so automatically you're competent enough. It might be a case of putting people in the gladiator, the Colosseum, and everybody fights to death, and the one who's the strongest takes control of the world. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure what system it is, but it requires something to be able to pull out competence and give that person absolute, complete authoritarian control. And to do that, we require revolutions. Throughout history, we've had loads of different revolutions that have led to very similar outcomes, led to change. The French Revolution is the one that's often cited as being a classic example of where massive change was made, which led to progressive futures, or a progressive future, and led to developments that were not seen in historical lifestyles and patterns. I think there are a few examples. There are challenges, obviously, with revolutions. Revolutions often lead to massive disruptions. They lead to lots of bloodbaths in most cases, right? And there's other negative drawbacks. Maybe I don't necessarily go into that right now. I want to focus at the high level on talking about what revolutions can do. A revolution is often very quick because we're able to make that change without having to deal with this bloviation where a company's, a president or an elected representative is just dancing around the place for 4 years or whatever, and just not necessarily doing what they want to do. It's rapid. It gets it done really fast. It's often unstable, like I said, often very violent. It is not necessarily as successful. Looking at some of the studies I researched, this is off the top of my head, so I'm not, it's been a while since I've looked at these studies, was about half the success rate of being able to lead to a stable system of governance. After that, it's about 50, I think it was 23, again, hold me to this, 23, 24%, something like that, versus a 50% rate when we're dealing with democratic changes. The risk of backlash is often high, so you could have lots of years of turmoil, etc., while you figure out what it is you're trying to do. There's the moral piece where people say it's not right to say it's not right. Maybe it's right to do these kind of things. Doesn't matter. But the key thing for me about that one is that it leads to an outcome that actually works for the people. If we have a revolution where we say we're changing this, and we're not changing it based on existing models that we've been following through the years around democracy, or the Chinese version of which is democracy, but not really, because China allows elections, but they only allow CCP members to be able to vote, and then the other ones, to be elected, but maybe they do, maybe they don't, and then not that this convoluted system. We need something that changes all of this, where we end up in an autocratic system which follows your pyramid, Jab, your system of control, where there's one at the top that has full autocratic power with no challenge from anybody else unless they become incompetent. And we need to have systems to be able to check their incompetence, not based on 4-year electoral cycles, but no, it's based on the competence levels and the ability to deliver that change and deliver the things that we require.
How do you get this autocratic person?
And how do you check them if they've got full control? If they've got total control?
This is where it depends on quite a few different systems that we could implement. So depending on the cultures and the way we work. For example, in Nigeria, I believe that we have quite a few interesting systems in Nigeria. We've got almost monarchical systems in Nigeria. We've got kingships, etc. Yeah, exactly. That we might be able to implement. And then we check them we could even just do based on your objectives. Set your objectives, and every couple of years, every 4 years, it could even be a very similar system. It's not about kicking you out and saying anything. We just have the people do a checklist. And it could even be voting based on the outcomes. We're not voting based on competition. We're voting based on your outcomes. We're saying, okay, based on what you said you'll deliver, have you delivered it? These are your 10 points for transformation. All of the populists now sit down and say, okay, these are the 10 points. We're not voting you versus somebody else as lying and you're lying, everybody's lying. No, we're voting based on what we perceive about the things that you set out. And we look through those 20 different things. If you don't meet half of them, or 75, or whatever it is that we want to set out as a system, if you don't meet them, you're kicked out. And then the next in line takes power, because we've arranged a system of hierarchical competence. It's a meritocracy where the hierarchy exists based on your competence, not based on your ability to get votes or your ability to get the camera things and kiss kids on camera and this cute baby and do all the nonsense. No, it's competence. And then we follow that level. So there is none of that focus on any need to be diplomatic or any need to be lying or be doing all these political.
So I think I like this representation by results that you're talking about, because the thing is, I mean, personally, I have thought long and hard about what is the best system for us at home. Like you, I am not convinced that superimposing the foreign systems, well, the Western system in this case, upon can revolution be achieved without violence? Yes, I think so, and I'll come to that with the Chisholm. So I think imposing that system from outside it's problematic. I think that example that you're describing, or this ideal that you're describing, is kind of what the Chinese people have done with their CPC party. So I'll talk about the Chinese revolution. I would say that it was relatively peaceful. Okay, so the Communist Party, there was 100 years of there were 2 opium wars in the 1800s, where for 100 years, China lost its mojo and became a opium addicted, nation, and everybody. And so anyway, so they had something that in my view, was a revolution. So the CPC came into power. Chairman Mao was the guy in charge at that point. The Chinese cut off from the rest of the world. And what were they doing in that time? What they were doing in that time was reorganizing their society. One of the first things you have to do, so you cannot have a revolution on the street without revolution in the mind. It has to happen in the mind before it can go to the street. So what do? The first thing you need to do if you have a revolution is that you have to structure education, because education is key. I look at education as a form of indoctrination. And I know that today when you talk about North Korea, people say, oh, these people are like so indoctrinated and all of those things. But we do the same thing here and anywhere. That's what schools are for. So you send people to schools and they go to kindergarten, primary, secondary school. What are you doing? You are imbuing your values and teaching them your values. So it's the same thing that the Chinese people did, and they looked at their history, 5,000 years history, and decided, how can we get out of this mess that we're in? So that's what the Cultural Revolution was about. And yes, there was hunger and all the other difficulties that you'd expect to happen when you close yourself from the rest of the world. That happened, but it set the bedrock of the Chinese. I would insist that you cannot have the current China without the Cultural Revolution. So subsequently, what has happened is, if you look at the CPC, what they do is they take about maybe a 50-year view of where do we want to be in 50 years. And every 5 years, they hold a major convention, if you want to put it that way, yes, where they discuss their policies and what have they done right, what have they not done right, how are we now going to achieve those results that we did not get. So, and this is how people vote in China and their leadership. Before you get to the kind of place where Xi Jinping is at the moment, you would have had to go from like the very, very, very bottom level. It's like our local government chairman, then you go to, becoming a governor, then, all that way. I'm sorry, they all take examination.
The question that I need us to address, we've got just a couple more minutes, and it's about Nigeria. So, and I'm sorry to jump in there, but again, question for both of you, Cross and Jab. So we've had all this, sorry?
I was just going to bring it back to Nigeria, right? So what I was going to bring it back to Nigeria is, I was going to say, we can learn from other people, but we have to adapt it and see whether it suits us. Because yes, we've got our monarchies and our chiefs and our, what are they called? Traditional leaders and all of those kind of things. People, is there a role for them, like in our system? And how about judging and voting based on results? Like he said, not just come and vote for this party. No, we are voting based on.
I've got a question for both of you on the basis of that. So great submissions, great ideas, great sort of imagination. So you've got Nigeria as it is today. Okay, crystallize all of your thoughts, everything you've thought about today that you've mentioned, the ideals. You've got Nigeria. What would you do? How would you change it? Again, let's get away from the theories now. We've kind of done the theories. You've got Nigeria as it is today. All the problems, all the prospects. What would you do?
I'll go first, and I'll just summarize my viewpoints. Anyway, so fundamentally, I think democracy is an idealistic dreamland thing. It's a unicorn. I want to have a horse that can fly that has horns. Nope, doesn't work, doesn't happen. It's great, fantastic, but you have a horse. That's it. Your horse runs. It does not fly. It hasn't got a horn. I think it doesn't work for that reason. We need something that actually works. To do that, and I'm going to, Udo, Floria, bro, I'm going to tie in his question to my answer as well. That fundamentally, I don't think democracy works. I think we need a new system of control, which I've articulated, being the more autocratic sort of pyramid view, where we have someone at the top who's accountable for outcomes and results. And when they're not, the next most competent person moves up, or there's a review every couple of years about the competence.
So you've got Nigeria today. How would you?
I'm going there. I'm going there straight into. I just wanted to just summarize my views, and then I'm going to jump straight into that. So, to do this in a country like Nigeria, for example, we need to have a system where we're just not doing the suit and tie thing. In Nigeria right now, if I was in control, let's assume they voted me into power, and I'm now the president, and they say your only mandate is to change how we deal with democracy or how we deal with leadership in Nigeria, what I'll do is I'll put a call to action first to say, people, provide your CVs and your manifestos fundamentally at multiple different levels. What do you intend to achieve? I'm not even going to go through a party system in the beginning. I'll be quite clear about that one. It won't be a party system. It'll just be a standard system where we'll use bits around fundamentally AI, regular sifting as well with regular people to say, what are the things that actually matter? Where are the key views that happen at the local level, the council level, the state level, federal level, that deliver on some kind of impactful value to the country? Once that initial sifting has been done, we go back to the people, and then we'll say we've aggregated these into key concepts. You can go and review all 150 or whatever of them that you want to go and review. We'll do the initial filtering. That'll be my own, my own first piece. Even though it might be a bit unfair because some people will lose out, it's fine. Do the first filtering. But we're now doing it based on manifestos of results. These results are not just words, they're tangible results, and focusing on that with their CVs attached of the ability to deliver on these things that they're talking about. If they've not delivered on it before and they have no experience of being able to deliver on that in any reasonable, tangible way, they're left out. And then I'll change the actual system. So we'll work through that. But the change the system itself to be voting based on outcomes. We're no longer going to be voting based on propaganda, based on electoral nonsense and all the adverts and then no. Every 4 years, 3 years, every year even, we'll be voting based on results. We're not even voting with competitors. It's no longer going to be a case of you are against another candidate. It's going to be based on you. That'll be what I'd focus on. And once that person is gone, we would before that person is gone, I'll take a step back. Sorry, I'm trying to work through the logic in my head here on the spot. We'll have to have a system where at the end of what we filtered and what based on what people have voted, people have their votes on priorities. This person has these key priorities. These are the key priorities for the people. So we'll have the people vote on what they want. These are the things that matter to us as a people. At the state, council, federal level, we care about water, we care about electricity, etc. These kind of things, people are mapped against what they say they can deliver within the next 1 year cycle, and then you have the CVs and the resumes, almost like a job. And then you have OKRs and KPIs. Within the next year, this is what we intend you to deliver. We're only voting you in based on voting you out based on your performance. That's it. Nothing else. There's no tenure. There's no length of service. There's none of that stuff. You don't need to go politicking. You don't need to go on the news articles, newspapers, the news rounds. You don't need to go on TV to do anything. You need to perform. You only get voted out if you don't perform. If we establish that system, it changes it from a case of political gerrymandering to a case of a performance-based system. That's what I would impute in Nigeria if I could.
Some fascinating ideas there. Jab, what would you do?
Okay, so it's a very good question. It's a very tough task. I think that the key area I will be looking at really would be education. And I'm talking education in schools. I'm talking education at also society levels. And I don't know if you guys remember the days of MAMSA. I would want a system like that to educate the public and take the public along. But in terms of fixing the wider issues of Nigeria, I really don't think that we should be looking at Nigeria in isolation. I think that this is something because when you look around the world, people are creating blocks. We need to look at our issues in the context of Africa. So I think a Pan-African solution is the way to go. And because as I've been explaining, we are praised, and there are people who want to prey on us and feed on our carcass, as it were. So it's not enough to just say, I'm going to just sort out Nigeria. I don't think that it would work that way. So we need a Pan-African solution. We need integration militarily, economically, politically. And I would say again, Africa needs to have a nuclear deterrence, because you can build very well, but you need to protect what you've got. And the only language, unfortunately, that the world understands at the moment is the one of force. So we cannot be naive. We need nuclear deterrence to protect all of those things. But I'm not saying, because I know people are going to, or people are, wont to say that you haven't sorted out education. Why are you going to do? We can chew gum and work, if I can put it that way. So we need to be looking at all of those things across the board.
Thank you very much. I think QB has just mentioned, again, ties into everything we've said, performance-based leadership. I've got the feeling that we need to come back on another episode around this performance-based leadership. It seems to be a theme. It seems everyone's kind of alluding to it, and it doesn't seem like we've had the time and the enough time and space to kind of hone in on that properly. But I think we've had a fascinating discussion today, as always. I think. I can see the passion there. I sense that people still have loads to talk about, but unfortunately, we've come to 1 hour has gone. I can't believe it's an hour already. It's an hour, 5 minutes. We've got to call it a day. Thanks, viewers, for listening and contributing. And thanks, Job and Cross. We will be back again next week. If there's anything you think you might want to sort of have a say in what we talk about next, please feel free. Just put something in the message. We'll think about them and see how. Do we want to have any sort of quick last words, or are we happy just to?
I'll have a quick last word. Yes. So QB Finest, thank you very much for that last comment. Absolutely, very important. When I talked about economic integration, it's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So he said, Pan-African based gold system. So gold currency, heard that's what the previous leader of Libya wanted. That's my understanding as well. So every time the West tells you they are intervening because of democracy and human rights and all of those things, that that's just absolute nonsense. It's usually the pretext for invading countries that pose a threat to their interest, and that interest is that hierarchy that I talked about earlier. So anything that undermines that, they are there, and they're going to use funny excuses to get rid of it, the person. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you hopefully next week.
My last sign out is just very simple. Performance-based leadership. We utilize that everywhere else in the world, and everything. Workplace, even in the homes. We look at that as your husband, wife. Divorce exists because people are not performing. Companies get cancelled because they're not, because the leader's not performing. They get fired, etc. Why do we not apply this to the most important thing? The leadership of our countries. That's it for me.
Thank you. Have a good evening, people. We will be back.
See you next week, same time. Goodbye.
Thank you.